Welcome in. Surprise! Eric Hecker is back with me on UAP. Stephen Diener here with you, Unidentified Alien Podcast. And I'm really happy and appreciative to have Eric Hecker back on the show with me. Your second appearance here on UAP. So thanks for coming back, Eric. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, great chatting again. I'm happy to be back. I know we had a good chat last time, so I'm just, hoping to keep going in this direction and get folks up to speed with what is, legitimately already occurring on the planet around us.
Yes, exactly. And well, you took the words right out of my mouth, because getting up to speed about what is going on around us in this current environment, because I'll start there. The last time you and I spoke, well, let me rewind even a little bit further. It was June of 2023 when I went to Washington, D.C., and I have to tell you, it was one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. And I'm not even kidding you. I'm not exaggerating or anything. Like, to make the decision, I was invited to go to Dr. Greer's Disclosure Project press conference. And I say it was one of the best decisions I've ever made to go, because I was there to see you speak. I was there to see Mike Herrera speak, and DC Long, and a few other great guys who really sent me personally and the show on a different, stratosphere as far as the conversations go. So everything has really stemmed from that time in June. And since I saw you speak there at that conference, where you made a lot of waves, I don't know if you were aware of how viral you went after that. You were up there for 5 minutes, and it was like a quick punch to the UAP world. And we've got to speak once since then on the show, and we covered a lot of bases then. But it's been a while since we got to speak. So I want to start from where we left off and kind of ask you what the heck has been going on since the last time we spoke. It's been a few months. So
I think you're probably right in noticing that I have caused waves in the disclosure community. And it mostly has to do with I come firing with facts and reality and direct firsthand experience and understanding of things, from being around other people with direct firsthand experience as well. And in these conversations and connecting of the dots, there's a lot of folks that are out there that seem to be pumping some sort of propaganda that's manufactured in some alphabet agency farm and then, put out to the community. But it all seems to be like well invested in distractions to keep, folks like me that pop up that are like a rogue wave in the system that, have some actual verifiable truth and firsthand experience. They don't know what to do with us. So there's a massive disclosure community that's built to confuse the population about what's going on in the UAP community. I mean, we've seen that the more we research the topic, we see that for decades, these programs already existed to confuse the people researching legitimate science. So are we to believe that activity has ceased? Or is it still prevalent? I feel like, as someone who's trying to get their truth out to we the people of the planet, that I'm observing a lot of blowback and resistance versus understanding and assistance.
right.
So that speaks volumes to me in my perspective of dealing with the disclosure community. I mean, these are the facts of my experiences. It seems to be a big racket.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that, because there's a couple of names that I want to get to when it comes to the disclosure community. But before I get there, I want to take it back and kind of shine a spotlight on you real quick, because just to remind people of your experience, right? Your firsthand accounts. I talked about that, those 5 minutes where you took that, quick blow to the UAP community back in June of 23, where you talked about your experience working at the base in Antarctica and experiencing these, neutrino experiments, the DOMs, as you've spoken about, and how it kind of translates into, direct energy weapons and things like that, causing an earthquake in Christchurch, New Zealand. So since then, what have you experienced in getting your story out there as far as blowback, as far as trying to discredit you? Because there's, for all the people who were shocked and drawn to your story, there's also a big contingency of people who say this is full of it. So what do you make of that of people who try to discredit you and what you've talked about as your firsthand experience of, you know, this advanced tech in conjunction with extraterrestrial life?
I think from my perspective, it's very easy to see these people as either the enemy themselves or aligned with them. And by the enemy, I mean in regards to the truth. There's people on this planet that want we, the people, to be completely informed as to the reality of things around us. And there's other people that are against that. We can reduce the teams down to those least common denominators. I'm for the team that is for people getting the truth. And it's obvious to me when people align themselves against me doing that, what side they're on. I get it might be a bit confusing for other people if they're not in my shoes, have walked my path, that they might be a bit more challenged. But this is why I kind of come hard hitting on the topic of Antarctica, because it should be really easy to the most casualist of observers on this topic that there's a whole bunch of people speaking out as if they know what's going on there, but they've never been there.
Right.
It's very intriguing to me as someone who's actually spent a substantial amount of time there,
How
which
long
is
were you there?
extremely rare.
Total,
And
how long were you there?
I was in Antarctica for 366 days straight.
Wow.
So there's a volume of experience that comes with that from my perspective, when someone says that they were a tourist there for 6 days, I mean, that experience to me is very laughable. That's not much of an Antarctic experience and not a lot to hang your hat on.
Yeah, it's a little bit different than, you know, a full year and a day, a full leap year.
Yeah, it's almost comical. I spent a year and a day in Antarctica.
So, in your experience, Hecker, well, Eric Hecker, in your experience there, number one, have you been back there since? When was the last time you were there?
Oh, I left in November of 2011 and couldn't be happier to have left at that time.
So you left and you're happy about it. You haven't looked back. Would you take another offer to go back there and do the contractual work that you had with Raytheon, right?
It's funny that you say that because it does come up regularly. And the reality is I didn't want to go there the first time, but I had to. I wouldn't want to go there again, but I'd be lying if I said that, like, if I had to, if some circumstance came up where somehow the roll of the dice was I had to go back there, I guess I would. It's something that I can do. So, I mean, it's on the possibilities list.
What is it that makes you hesitate about going back? Now, obviously it's Antarctica, so not the greatest conditions, but aside from that, what is it just because you know from firsthand experience what was happening there and you just were not comfortable with
all
the
above? I mean, even just a repetition of the first year that I did, I now have a much grander understanding of what you're donating to that program, so to say. It you know, in addition to, yes, it is South Pole Station in the winter season, so I mean, these are real considerations, I guess, of danger that most people can't even comprehend. Like, you know, we did it, so it was funny for us, and, you know, we joked about it at the time. But in reality, I mean, wintertime at the South Pole Station, you never get a chance to really appreciate that Mother Nature wants you dead. Then, like, I mean, it's palpable there. Like, you walk out, like, I would go to do my rounds and it's a winter storm at the South Pole of the planet. Like, Mother Nature has already predetermined for eons. She does not want anything alive there. So just going for a walk was like having a conversation with Mother Nature. Like, listen, I know you want me dead right now.
I'll be gone soon. Just leave me alone.
Yeah, I'm totally going to make it through this winter, even though everything that you've designed to be going on right here is to my detriment.
What was, I'll ask it this way, Eric, because we know what Raytheon and the experiments that they were conducting there as far as the technology they were using for direct energy weapons and, putting things out into the universe and possibly causing natural disasters, which we'll get to as well. What was it that they were doing then, Raytheon, in 2011 versus what you think they're doing still now in 2024?
I guess the difference would just be that they're looking to now scale things up. The time that I was there, 2010 into 2011, was transitional year for both the ice cube neutrino detector and the elevated station, the new facility, basically. They were both going from construction to operations and maintenance for the first time ever. So now, from that point until now, would basically just be them figuring out design flaws, corrections, upgrades, how to make things better than the last 10 years it had been operating. And it appears that the ice cube neutrino array is slated to be increased in dimension tenfold. It is already the world's largest phased array transmitter on the planet, and they're about to scale it up tenfold.
So let me ask this for the layperson, and quite honestly for me, because it's very technical, right? So how do you explain a phased array transmitter or array transmitter to someone who's never heard of that before? What is the mission of a phased array transmitter that Raytheon is doing with?
Think of it as a ray gun, and the larger the array field in many dimensions. So like a HARP antenna, previously like the ones in Alaska, were on the surface of the Earth. So they had length and width to them. But the ice cube neutrino detector is special insofar as that it goes down into the ice and now has the dimension of depth and giving it a third plane to function off of. So just imagine having a network of these DOMs, the balls, in a mesh, so to say, and just by being able to control and functionally fire and transmit from each DOM in a controlled phased array, you now can manipulate the beam to steer it and shoot it and aim it. I mean, basically it's making a ray gun for, I mean, if you want to say, put it in layman's terms for people, it's a ray gun and it can shoot you.
So what are they trying to shoot at? And what's the idea behind that? If they're trying to use it as, I guess for lack of a better term, and maybe it's the term, if they're trying to use it as a weapon of some sort, where is that directed to?
It's directed to the mind, which is the battlefield of the future, and they can now just access things more directly than they used to. You know, you used to propagandize and brainwash a community through television, through news articles. You know, the mass media has always been corrupted for the benefit of whatever political arm of the nation, whatever geographical boundaries. I mean, this is what we, the people, have witnessed, is that we all like to act like, oh, our country would never do that. But every country seems to be doing it across the board and just putting out information that's just, you know, not necessarily the truth. But we, the people, still have a right to spread that stuff around as fast and furiously as we can. It's just freedom of speech is no longer free. It's, you know, it's like marketing now. How do you get your truth out there? I came to the disclosure community thinking that I would get a warm welcome and assistance and understanding in getting this information to the greater community. But instead I found out that, you know, if people can't make a buck off of the information that I'm trying to get through them, then they're completely not interested, and they'll pretty much work against you, because if you're not with them, you're against them, and they're there to make a buck, and you won't give them your info to profit. So now they don't like you.
It's really something. You talk about, so that's the mission that you've seen, right? That's the mission
Hmm.
that you want to get out to people that you know. That's what Raytheon is up to in Antarctica with these, phased array transmitters and this super advanced. What do they say they're up to? They're, I guess, so to speak. How does Raytheon paint this as this is our mission in, Antarctica in the South Pole?
I guess currently they would say they don't have a mission at the South Pole. Raytheon Polar Services, when they lost the contract, my understanding is that they don't exist anymore. So
Mm.
they would say we have no presence there,
Does
which I would say
Congress?
is which I would say is just part of the revolving door plan of covering the story. Is that they don't even care to talk about it anymore. Now you'd have to talk to Lockheed Martin and PAE and other military industrial contractors that have their hands in that till.
So this is a black book operation, essentially.
Oh, absolutely. It's almost a joke that the the United States Antarctic Program, the acronym is USAP, which is also for the Unacknowledged Special Access Programs.
Hmm. You can kind of slip that in there, I suppose.
Yeah, oh, this is the USAP program needs a check cut from Congress, because that's basically how it works. Is the National Science Foundation gets the check from Congress and decides how much the USAP program, the United States Antarctic Program, receives. So that's the money train.
And it's so funny you bring that up, because I was going to ask, in your experience or from what you've heard, how much does Congress know about this? Are they hip to this at all as far as what's going on, or do they just turn a blind eye?
Well, this is what happened when I went and spoke in the SCIFs, the secret compartmented information facilities. I spoke with both the Senate Intelligence Committee's people and then also the folks at that new department, AARO, AARO. And the long and short of it was that they were appreciating everything that I was sharing with them. The dialogue seemed to center around that. It's kind of obvious, but it's just, I guess we were going through the red tape of due process of figuring out and discussing. But the issue at hand seemed to be that there's rogue factions all over the place at this stage of the game. Things have gotten so secreted and so compartmentalized that there's just rogue factions running around without oversight. Right. And it's very challenging to reel them all in when there's so many of them working against each other right now.
And is that the case?
Vying for existence.
And that's the thing, because you talked about the money train. Is that really what it comes down to? Because I know a lot of people have suspected that when you have questions, follow the money, right? That's what I said before in these situations. And it seems like that's the answer when it comes to the secrecy, when it comes to the lack of the acceptance of a disclosure moment from Congress. I know you have people like Tim Burchett, Anna Paulina Luna, Jared Moskowitz, people like that who have pushed for these things out in the public, but then you have your Mike Turners of the world and people like that who push against it. Is that because they are working with the Lockheeds and the Raytheons and these defense contractors, and their job is to play, interference to make sure this stuff doesn't get out, because then the money train runs dry?
Yeah, this is what we would call gatekeepers in the disclosure community. These are people that are controlling the narrative, that are, giving these slow, controlled leaks versus giving out the truth. And usually that's just so that there's, profiteering involved. And these folks are really just puppets or parrots for whoever their handlers are. So it's not, it doesn't even remotely look like the truth. It's a freaking operation across the board. If they're not fighting for the whole truth, like right now, if they're with this whole, the people can't take the truth, like that's on behalf of the bad guys. That benefits the bad guys. Humanity, natural human beings living a naturally good life. We are resilient against the test of time. Our existence is our pedigree that proves that we can take anything. That's why they don't want us to know, is because if we know, we will do everything it takes to rectify anything. That's what we do. So the real reason they want to keep people in the dark is they just fear retaliation.
Boy, that's
They're,
yes,
they're
right.
just scared of getting their heads chopped off like tyrant kings of old, and they're trying to they're trying to take the fear and lay it at the wrong feet in this equation.
I think you're absolutely right when it comes to that. Is not even there's two parts to this, right? There's the train, where you have your defense contractors and things like that, and then there's something that someone like George Knapp has mentioned before of how people would go to jail. This is something where if truth about these programs, whether it's advanced weaponry or what's happening in the South Pole, whether it's a culture of secrecy surrounding the UAP discussion from Roswell until now, there's a lot that's happened in between 1947 and 2024
Mm-hmm.
that there's a lot of laws broken and a lot of things on the black books that would cause people to go to jail. So that those two things to me, and maybe the religious aspect as well. So maybe those three things, I'll get your thoughts on it. Is that kind of the three main things that prevent disclosure: money, religious aspect, and going to jail?
I don't know. I don't know if those are the three main things. I find that a lot of this stuff is typically more complex than can be simplified. And that seems to be one of the common issues with addressing these dilemmas, is that people are wishing that they were simpler than they are. So nobody really seems to be attacking from the appropriate angle, because if you don't really understand how severe the problem is, what are the odds that you're addressing it correctly? So a lot of this has to do with people being so in the dark and not realizing how far off the mark their understanding of reality around them is, and how much more to their detriment the situation is. And it's almost like, people are currently losing a battle, and nobody's really prepared to hear that or do anything about it. It's our enemy's in a very strong position right now with what's available for technology on this planet and how it can be used against unwitting people. And people right now are really enjoying being unwitting to the technology around them.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's the old saying of, ignorance is bliss in some cases. And I think a lot of people are kind of stuck in that mode.
Everyone knows all the terrible things that their technology is currently doing and interfacing with them, and they're completely ignoring the simple cons side of the cons list. There's pros and cons to everything. They're uber focused on the pros list and completely like, don't tell me that my cell phone reading my thoughts every 30 seconds has a negative impact on me.
It's
just because my phone is monitoring my respiration rate 24 hours a day and my pulse and all just because they're taking more information than Hitler ever had access to or would have killed for, just because all that is going on, don't tell me that there's a negative. I mean, I'm just getting my steps in. That's all that's going on. It's
a funny world we live in, Eric, which is why I'm happy that you can come back on, because this is, it's a conversation that isn't really happening a lot, to talk about things that are kind of heavy and a lot of things that people wouldn't focus on normally, I think. And one of the things that I think is fascinating to me that I want to bring up to you is, where do they get this technology, right? I'll just use Raytheon as an example, because that's a subject that we were on as far as what they're doing in the South Pole and the technology that you've seen, that you spoke about with the DOMs and the phase rate transmitter and things of that nature. Where does it come from? Is this developed out of secret, programs, or are these things happening from reverse engineering, alien tech? I mean, what are we looking at here in your, opinion?
I think that would be a battle of semantics at that point. I mean, let's just say they had a yet another brand new weapon that we never imagined. Let's say comes out right now in the middle of this conversation. Oh my God, this is the craziest, most destructive thing ever. I don't think I'd be as concerned with how they got their hands on it as much as I would be concerned as who has the ability to use it.
Hmm.
And I think that's, that's kind of the bait and switch on what's going on with a lot of this stuff, is that we're coming across good info, but then we're having well-placed folks that are redirecting the conversations into what I would say is a battle of semantics. A lot of people would say there's no such thing as a bad question or a dumb question. Well, there are certainly avenues of inquiry that run away from the point of a topic, and some of the more talented feds or podcasters or whatever you want to call them, I mean, that's just what their job is to do, is to tactfully move the audience away from the important parts of the conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think we see that a lot, and maybe in some cases that we're not even realizing, because, well, actually, one of the things that is a pretty hot topic where we might be seeing some activity like that you're speaking of is in a case of the Malaysian Airlines flight, MH370. And I'm wondering,
Okay.
just to kind of, switch gears on that, but if we're talking about advanced technology, I noticed actually that you were on with Ashton Forbes not too long ago. And I've had Ashton on here on UAP a couple of times. Really fascinating guy, really fascinating explanations that he gives as to how and why MH370 would have disappeared the way that, he's showing in the videos that he puts out. Three orbs circling it from the drone video, and it disappears. Is that, in your mind, is that possible from what we've seen in those videos that Ashton Forbes has put out, from the technology and experiences that you've come across? Could the US or any country have secret reverse engineered technology like that would use, anti-gravity craft to essentially, in layman's terms, teleport an airplane?
I'm new to Ashton's work in regards to that topic, but I am intrigued by what he's putting out there.
Yeah.
I'm vaguely familiar with some videos that he's put out. I have seen some stuff. I just don't want to, come out like I'm some all-knowing guy in regards to his efforts. I think he's doing great work. I don't know enough about the videos to say, I mean, what could be accomplished in DaVinci Resolve nowadays is pretty much anything you can imagine can be manufactured. I mean, it's just off the wall what people can edit and make.
Right.
So I would have to trust that the videos are accurate and legit, and, taking that into consideration, being hypothetical on what technologies we already know exist. I think it's not a far leap of logic at all to consider the things that Ashton is putting on the table. I mean, that's kind of the same angle that I'm coming from. And he and I are meeting in the middle. Is just simply, folks, like, you have to at least start considering what can be going on around us with the technologies that do exist, that they're just not communicating to us. There has to be a massive amount of highly advanced technology that many factions on this planet have access to. It's the general population who's kept in the dark by design, by all the protocols that keep things super duper secret squirrel stuff. I mean, we all know that those systems are in play, but nobody wants to discuss what has to be happening in plain sight in regards to the technologies being used that are just simply kept secret from us. Why would anybody think they're not being used?
That's a question that is, I just think that people don't want to believe they're being used. I think people want to believe that, we can just come home and scroll through our phones and, watch TV and have dinner with our family and not focus on, gee, I wonder if an airplane, an airplane is going to be teleported today, or if they're going to use a, direct weapon in the South Pole to control my mind. And I'm not sure
Right.
that people are ready to, maybe not that they're ready, but it's just for people to make a leap into thinking that way, if that makes sense.
I get where you're getting at, but you're right. Therein lies the problem.
Yeah.
Right. So now here we are at the precipice of this cliff. This is the issue, is that people are choosing to naively stay in the ignorance's bliss zone because it is human nature that once we become aware of a problem, we do feel an obligation to do something about it. So people will resist the truth, like cognitive dissonance, because they're resisting their obligation to understanding. That's really what's going on.
Right.
Is they know the effort of changing their mind. They know what they're going to have to do once they realize this is true, and people will be lazy in their decision making because this is just simply not living up to their own morals and responsibilities. But everybody knows the right thing to do. There's at no point in anybody's life when you actually sit there and you think in your own head, like, what the right or wrong thing to do is. This is amazing. Everybody knows it's true. But we all know that we suffer from an inability to choose to do the right thing, not a lack of understanding. We always know what right and wrong is.
Yeah.
We just sometimes know we're choosing to do the wrong thing, but we're never confused. We always know what right and wrong is.
Yeah. Ignoring sometimes is more convenient, I think. And that's where.
Absolutely. And we just need to challenge people to be more responsible to doing the right thing as individuals, with respect to realizing that that's going to help the group in the circumstance that this herd of human existence has become right now, so tightly corralled that we're going to have to work together as individuals on a team to empower each other, to break through the walls of the containment that we've been put in. And it's going to take great effort, because we're losing that battle currently with the technology that exists that no one's paying attention to.
If something came out, just to kind of connect this to a question here, in some of the natural disasters that have happened, say within the past, let's just say 6 months, going back to the fires in Hawaii, some of the earthquakes that have happened around the world recently, and within the past month, even not even within the past 6 months. If something came out that showed definitively, because there's obviously a lot of talk about when things like that happen, you talk about, well, the fire in Hawaii was started by, a laser weapon or whatever it may have been, or it was intentionally done. And then you have these earthquakes happening. And we think about what you spoke about, what caused the earthquake in Christchurch, New Zealand about, 14, 15 years ago. If people saw definitive, and I know definitive is a tough word and it's really a subjective word, but if people saw definitive proof in front of their face that natural disasters, even the ones that I just spoke about, were happening intentionally because of technology that was being used.
I think you're trying to connect too many dots at one point is all. That people need to learn discernment, and they need to start paying attention to least common denominator situations that then connect a whole bunch of things together. Here, I guess definitive proof is a relative term and opinionated from one person to another. Right. But since the ball is thrown in my court and the topic is here, how about just quite simply, where are the thousands of children that are simply missing from the Hawaiian fire event?
Great question.
If everything's on the up and up, and this was just a simple happenstance, where are all the children at?
Yeah.
So if the children are simply missing. There's a massive mystery going on. So we would have to then start looking at motives and values. And then I did an interview one time with Clayton on Redacted, and we touched on the topic rapidly, but this is a horrible question to pose, but a terrible reality that people need to at least appreciate exists. What is the street value in the black market for a child?
It's unfortunately, I hate to use this word, but it's a lucrative business, as disgusting and evil as that is.
Disgustingly lucrative.
Yeah.
So if you have the ability to manipulate a lot of things by whatever detail you want and whatever you have available to you as resources, which could be high technology unbeknownst to most. But if you have these items at your fingertips to cause events by any definition, and then helper crews to come in by any definition and give access, well, then next thing you know, you would have a circumstance where you'd have just a whole bunch of missing children. And we seem to keep having events like this happening over and over and over again, where children just go missing in bulk by a new set of details. So I would say follow the money, follow the children, follow the disasters, and then start looking at all of the details and start to consider, are there ways to make these circumstances occur? Could people be playing a deck of cards and we don't even realize this game is going on? Oh, and the other side's winning.
So should we make the leap, Eric, that, just using Hawaii as an example, that is something that wasn't natural? And if that's the case, should we make a leap to suspect that other natural disasters within the past year have been natural? When we talk about earthquakes and things like that. I mean,
absolutely. I think absolutely. I think we absolutely need to be having conversations like this more often. That the ability to manipulate the weather or the forces of weather, the forces of nature, whatever you want to call it, I believe we need to start having dialogues on this topic to discuss literally just that. Like, what is the state of energy modification? There's so many things that are going on around us that the general population is just not privy to, but it's going on around us.
And I think one thing that the general population might have in mind when we talk about this would be, well, how, right? They would hear this and say, well, how would they do that? How would they cause an earthquake? How would they cause, a wildfire in Hawaii that would kill, hundreds and thousands of people? Like, what are you guys talking about? How could that even happen? What do you say to someone
with the same circuit boards and computers that everybody touches every day and just reconfiguring them in a way that's more to their detriment? I mean, how does everything else work around everybody? With reconfigurations of the same stuff that everybody else is touching, they're just going to reconfigure it in a way that now it's to your detriment. And you don't really need to understand how a gun works completely to understand it can blow your brains out when someone's pointing it at your head. So I'm just trying to emphasize to folks that there's an aspect to the digital world called directed energy weapons. They're electronic weapons, and they don't provide the same wounds of old. But since we are in the throes of a modern war where these weapons are being wielded with great regularity, the vast majority of people in proximity to you are walking wounded, but with a new set of symptoms relative to the contemporary weapons being utilized.
Speaking of that, actually, Eric, something that just came out in the mainstream media within the past few weeks was the word about Havana syndrome. And they've spoken to different U.S. agents who all give the same details as far as how they felt when they started to get affected by what they called Havana syndrome, because it goes back to, how U.S. agents felt it, or diplomats started to feel this way in Havana, Cuba. And there's been a lot of talk about this, like I said, and I mentioned mainstream on purpose because these reports hit the mainstream media that have been talked about by people like you and I for the past, few years, and now it's out there, and they're pretty much acknowledging that, according to the mainstream reports, Russian agents were using this directed energy weapon to mess with people's minds. Is this the kind of stuff like this that relates to what we're talking about, right? Maybe on a
Yeah,
smaller
absolutely.
scale.
I mean, this is reality, is that there's stuff that's now coming out. People, if this was true, we'd hear something about it. Well, it just keeps, more and more information is coming out that supports what I have already put out there. I mean, I've been doing this for a fistful of years now. The whole world has had every opportunity to step up and say, this is exactly why what Eric Hecker has presented absolutely cannot occur. But that's not what's going on. There's just more and more people that are coming to the understanding of the history of technology, how we got from point A to point B to point Z to where we are now. It's pretty freaking referenceable. The technology exists. There are people that have access to it. Someone's doing something with it. I mean, everything is observable. There's other systems out there. There's people that are paying attention to the earthquakes on the planet. There are people paying attention. Just because there are bad kids in the sandbox throwing sand around doesn't mean that, we're all going to lose this. It just means that we all have to work together and get things straightened out.
Right. Try to get the bad kids out of the sandbox.
Correct.
How much do you think has changed, Eric, in the past, say, 14 years, right? We go from 2010 when you were working in the South Pole. How much do you think has changed just from what you've observed and have heard through the grapevine in what they were developing then to now? And where do you think it will be 6 years from now in 2030?
Oh, this is the easiest question in the world to answer.
Oh, good.
What has changed is the enemy has gained so much ground through mind control, through application of technology. How else could you look at that time period you're going to say from 2010 until now, 14 years later? We previously, 2010, had a population that was not really involved with smartphones yet.
Right.
So we still had a world that had human engagement and interactions completely, and digital relations and interactions minimally. Now that has been reversed. That was the intention of our enemies, who this is proof of what I'm saying, that they're winning because they have changed that ratio. So now the vast majority of human beings are having massive digital engagements over the course of their waking state during the day, and having few and far between human interactions or engagements. They're quite simply losing their humanity.
That's all by design.
This is all the application of intentions against them and utilizing nefarious plots and understandings. It's to me ridiculous that most people can't even see this right now, because everybody's addicted to their gear. People can't walk away from their phones for 30 seconds. They can't leave it in the house if they're going to the store. I mean, anybody can try proving me wrong by ditching your gear right now. But since we know that's not happening, everybody just needs to, it's like Alcoholics Anonymous, just admit, hi, my name is such and such, and he's absolutely right. I'm so addicted to this little digital devil, it's not even funny.
I want to ask you, and you're not wrong, by the way. I want to get to a couple more things here, because I know we've gone long as this, and I could probably talk to you for 3 hours, but I know you don't have that much time. So I'll get a couple more things in here before we're done for today. What are your thoughts? I'm curious on the whistleblower uh, environment, when you hear names like David Grush, when you hear names like Ryan Graves, or these men in the military who have come out to speak about what they've experienced in their roles within government and the intelligence agencies. And even recently, if you're not familiar with the name yet, because this is a new one, if you're not familiar, that's fine. But a name that's making the rounds now is Jason Sands. And this is a guy that's showing up in the new James Fox documentary, talking about his firsthand encounter with an alien, meeting one face to face back in the mid 90s in the desert areas of New Mexico, in that area. And he came out on Twitter over the weekend in a Twitter space to talk about his experience, at a 5-hour discussion. And he has been drugged through the ringer by a lot of people over the past few days. So I'm wondering, where do you see the current climate right now in the whistleblower world?
I see it as a wildly controlled operation on a massive scale. I find there to be few and far between genuine people in the disclosure community, because they all seem to be working as some sort of clique, and representing one way over here and representing another way over here. And, it's an amazing network or organization. But if you pay attention to it long enough, you'll see all of the connecting nodes. So it's certainly not natural in how it's functioning. So to me, it's just, figuring out who the gatekeepers are, crashing through the gates. And this is the problem with truth and trying to get it to the people contemporarily, is that, there's nothing stopping anybody from getting a microphone, getting a camera, starting a web page, so certainly if it's easy for me to do, if it's easy for you to do, it's also very easy for the alphabet agencies to do. And you think that they're just going to leave this amazing PR opportunity alone? I mean, obviously, this field or arena has to be top heavy with feds. It has to be.
Do you think that's the
people
majority?
that refuse to have that discussion usually smell the most of Fed, because they don't want to get involved with that topic. But I mean, folks, come on, think about it. There has to be more feds in content creation than there is non-feds, or the feds aren't doing their job. I mean, if we know they infiltrated the mass media when it was expensive to buy a reporter or a broadcast network to get them under the wing of the alphabet agency, well, now they don't have to waste all that money. They can just pay low-grade Fed wages to some knucklehead to be a content creator to try to, manipulate conversations. It's very easy to do. It's botting in real time, trolling the world, brought to you by your tax dollars.
Well, I can promise you I'm not a Fed, but maybe that's what a Fed would say. I don't know.
But either way, like, this is the logic still remains on the table to discuss. What percentage of content creators do people believe are feds? Because I suggest you need to bump your numbers up.
It's interesting.
And how come no one else is saying this? How come no one else in the community is concerned that disinformation is a game still being played, and why this playing field would be avoided?
It's really interesting. So let me throw this scenario out. So where's the disinformation and who is it against, right? So when we're talking about some of the names I mentioned, David Grush or Ryan Graves, or now with Jason Sands, who came out over, this past weekend as we speak here today, or I should say over the past week, or anyway, are they, in your estimation, this information is trying to point to different things to say, hey, look,
absolutely, because what evidence did anybody provide?
Or is it the people who are trying to disprove them?
It's them. How dare they get as far into the public eye as they're being pressed into, when they have zero proof. When someone has zero proof and they're being put up on a pedestal, you have to ask why. Why are those people put on pedestal and the people who have proof they invest in ignoring them? If that's not showing the machinations of a system that is anti-truth, I mean, folks got to really get their blinders off and start paying attention to what's actually going on.
It's really interesting, Eric. It's a theory that I think some people have put out there as far as who to trust, obviously, right? I mean, look, people argue all the time on Twitter and social media about, well, this guy's lying and this guy's lying. No, this guy's telling the truth. And
yep. And as they all reduce their social interactions, they all lose the ability to have that discernment that used to be built into every human being. Everybody was very confident when they, got a read on someone at first sight, a gut feeling. Nobody would ever have a problem going against their own experience at the moment. But now all of a sudden, all that gets challenged. And what is your opinion compared to somebody else's opinion? And now people are more worried about making a politically correct response that's approved by society so they get the right points for the day and pats on the back versus what their own experience tells them is how they should function in a circumstance. So as we lose humanity, we lose that discernment, and we can now look at how those that are trying to control us, that these are the manipulations and they're getting exactly what they want. You're right. People don't seem to have the ability anymore to know who to trust. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that a massive problem that that's what's currently going on in our society? Is people don't know who to trust anymore. Well, how did that occur?
Yeah.
It occurred because people intended for that to occur by separating us from each other for a few decades so that we no longer had the interactions that would give us that perspective and understanding.
So confusion and lack of discernment is the name of the game.
Absolutely. Disinformation, misinformation, lies, deception. That is what's going on. And the people are so far out of the loop as to what exists technologically and is being used about them. It's not like gunshots and gunfire. You don't see it, you don't hear it, but it doesn't mean that you're not caught in the crossfire of those wielding it against each other.
Well, it's really interesting. I'm going to switch gears here a little bit because there's a few more things I want to get to before we're done. And thank you so much, Eric, for spending all this time. And I really appreciate you coming back on.
You got
like
it.
I said, second appearance here on UAP. And it's great to have you on because it's always a fascinating discussion, really thought-provoking. So on that note, kind of moving back just real quick to the South Pole. And I meant to bring this up before, so I don't mean to bounce back and forth on things.
That's all good.
When it comes to extraterrestrial involvement or interaction in Antarctica, I'm sure you're aware, there's been a lot of theories about Antarctica. There's a cave here that has been seen where UFO has been coming out of. There's a crash trail that's been shown on satellite imagery that shows, a cigar-shaped, UAP that had slid across the snow of Antarctica. And there's all these theories about what can be hiding in the South Pole that's, aliens would be using their advantage. Have you ever heard of or believe in theories that the South Pole is being used basically as a hideaway for ETs?
I'm very open to all possibility existing always, and I'm not against the possibility of any of these things going on. The frustrating thing is that how often these sensational stories are brought up and dangled in front of the general population, again, with no proof. It's just simply speculating. It's no different. It's no different than just writing a fiction story that is not supported in reality. And every time people bring up a subject, you read a chapter out of this fantasy novel. And it seems to happen every time somebody brings up what is going on in verifiable reality. So to me, it just seems like a massive operation to keep people dumbed down, that every time the truth presents itself for a speckle of time, all of a sudden, all these gatekeepers come running out of the woodwork with, did you know that there could be this? And maybe there's a that. And, oh, there was a picture on the internet. None of these things ever seem to come out with anybody ever putting their name on it. Nobody's ever said, I hiked into Antarctica. I found this hole. This is the picture I took. There's never any sources. It's always just this mystery. Trust me, I'm not an AI creating an article. So first and foremost, if anybody wants to have a conversation on the topic of Antarctica, I'm game, but what qualifies the information being presented by some anonymous nobody that we don't know ever went to Antarctica? You can throw that right out the fucking window as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
I don't know how people waste 2 seconds on unsubstantiated clickbait. Because it's a cool fucking topic, because somebody had a picture with something blurred out on Antarctica.
Yeah, it's it's something, because that's why I wanted to bring it up to you, right? You've been there, like we said earlier.
Yeah,
in the
it's propaganda. It's all manufactured BS to distract from the fact that there are legitimate things to discuss. So they love bringing out, the shiny UFO alien conversation. Again, I'm not against the possibility of it at all.
But you never saw anything.
Let's keep the conversations. We the people only have a certain amount of energy to put into the direction of correcting things on our planet. So how about we have discussions on the things that we can prove are going on? Yeah. And let's realize that the people that want to speculate for speculation's sake for ad nauseum are there to waste our time and energy from getting down to the problems. Yeah, these people that just constantly, whatever the next sensational chapter is in their fiction book, because that's all they're really doing is building up some sort of persona and, profiteering scam. They're not really, the term is actionable intelligence. That's what I'm trying to look for. They're not, no one's really bringing actionable intelligence to these conversations.
Right.
I'd like to think that I'm a diamond in the rough in that capacity, is that I've actually brought actionable intelligence. I can't make the actions occur, but the people that are hearing what I'm saying, those in the know, and I get that's few and far between, but there's a lot of people that do appreciate the information that I've put out there, and they do understand. This is actionable intelligence. There are folks that can do something about this if they choose to. There's not a lot of people in disclosure that can say that they've brought actionable intelligence to the table. And that's where I think a lot of these people are just schmoes and operatives and agents by some definition, because it looks to me like it's just still part of the big game of them trying to flood the playing field, so to say, with misinformation or disinformation, because, it muddies the waters for the truth coming out.
Well, you are absolutely one of those people who can bring the actionable intelligence, and you have, many times. One of the places that you did it was at the Disclosure Project in June of 2023, held by Dr. Stephen Greer. Do you still work with Dr. Greer or with some of the guys who were there? Mike Herrera, who I've had on the show a couple of times, and DC Long, who I still speak to here and there, actually. And he's been on the show. So is that something that you guys still stay in contact as far as the actionable intelligence that all three of you brought that day and have brought still since then?
We do keep in touch, actually. I find Michael and DC to be extremely funny human beings.
Yeah, good guys.
We get along great. So, yeah, we always discuss having more conversations, which now that you said that, it reminds me I should contact them and have a chat. It's a bit overdue, technically. Dr. Greer and I have stayed in contact, I guess more as friends than professionals. I know he got hurt bad recently, but is doing better. So, my hat goes off to him for his efforts. I've done some stuff with some of the production crew from his event, and there's supposed to be some sort of documentary coming out, but they're having issues. I mean, production stuff.
Right.
I guess it's just like building a house. Sometimes it doesn't go on schedule, and everybody's like, "Yeah, that's how it happens." So
Yeah,
one of those things is going on.
That's how that goes. No, but that's cool to hear that. You get that contact, and I'd love to have you all on together if that could ever materialize. I think that'd be fantastic. I think everybody would enjoy that. So.
Oh yeah, every time I'm on with Mike or DC, yeah, things are a bit interesting.
I think that would be a lot of fun. We'll get you out of here on this, Eric, because very recently in the series of episodes that I had put out on the traditional side of of the UAP podcast, I had been covering over the past couple of episodes the subject of remote viewing, and I think it's something that you've had experience with. Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I want to get to that to kind of end things here today, because it's a subject that I find extremely fascinating. Going back to Edgar Casey, going back to Joe McMoneagle, who that's the person I was speaking about actually in the two-part series that I put out over the past week or two. Just really, really fascinating stuff, and the ability behind it of being able to essentially have space and time null and void. to see different things in different times in different parts of the world.
Yeah, things are way more complex than we've been allowed to consider. So this is where we need to take our brains and realize that, like you're delving into remote viewing. Well, guess what you're going to find out? It's all legit. Now what do you do? Looking around the world about you, realizing that technically everyone has this power available to them.
Right. That's right.
And
that's something
so some people use it better than others, but we all have access to this skill set, just like we all have access to becoming the world's greatest guitarist. There's nothing stopping anyone from learning how to play a guitar better than they can right now, which might be that they can't. But that doesn't mean that you can't practice and learn and become proficient. And certainly some people are better at it than others. But this is no different of a practicable skill set than if somebody was going to, it is like a return on investment. You do know, like if you put more time into practicing a guitar, you will get better.
Yeah.
That it functions. So it's the same thing with remote viewing, whatever people want to call it, this mysterious toolkit that nobody wants to talk about, that the energy aspect of what's going on around us in mystery is something that we can work with.
Yeah. It's some, that's why it's so fascinating to me to think that, we all have that ability within us. Just a matter of, again, how much time are we willing to spend to put into it, to tap into that, into
right. And now what do we do when we have to start to put our brains in the direction? Well, what if there's an aspect of humanity that's always been dealing with this, always been good at it? What does that do? You're like, we don't even have words now for this type of classism, so to say. When you have whole aspects of society that could be like a secret royalty based on cognitive skills or abilities. I mean, it gets really peculiar really fast to realize that, we could have amongst us our own worst enemies, is that it could be, high level mental enslavement.
Well, it's something that we know. It's not even really an opinion. It's something that we know that the US government and both the Russian government have employed in spy games, is having remote viewers. And that's where, a guy like Joe came in, where he was employed by the US government, the CIA, the Army, to look into finding KGB spies. And then they also kind of said, hey, can you look into Mars and some alien bases that might be under some mountains? So
Hmm.
he had a very long career with this, and I believe it's at the Monroe Institute, if I'm not
Yep.
mistaken. But what is your experience, Eric? What kind of experience have you had with remote viewing? Where's that
My,
road taking you?
my experience was that it started in my youth as some sort of offshoot project for one of the alphabet agencies was to work with children and to test for and or improve whatever was inherent in a child that made them a good remote viewer. And there are folks, or I should say there is a folk, there's a gentleman by the name of David Morehouse who has been interviewed twice now. I believe it was on the, I think, Danny Jones podcast.
Hmm.
And in one of the videos, he discusses being in the United States remote viewing program in the late 70s, early 80s. And he mentions that they became privy to foreign nations having these programs that were involving children,
Hmm.
and that it was almost immediately approved. Well, if they're doing it, we have to do it. So,
Right.
bingo, there was a program that was admitted to by one of the remote viewers stating that they then took that program and started applying it to children. And that's what he stated. That supports my claim that I have said that when I was a kid, they were doing the Robert Monroe Institute remote viewing protocols training hemisync to us as children.
How were you chosen for that? How did that come about?
I guess through the testing at my school that they were, filtering through
I see.
children and abilities, and I tested out really well. I was a smart son of a bitch in grammar school. It was so easy to me. I mean, to be completely honest, that's just putting it plain and simple. I mean, I feel like ridiculous saying it because it should be obvious, but yet I guess some people found elementary school challenging. I found it like the easiest thing in the world as a kid. Like reading, writing, math at an elementary level was so freaking easy.
And that kind of led you down that road, and you found yourself in this program. What kind of experiences did you have there? Did you end up sticking with remote viewing? Did you see other kids that ended up becoming more involved with the program as years went on?
It's very interesting that it was pretty complex. There was a decent amount of children around. It happened both on property for the school, off property at what they would call retreats or other facilities. So there was a lot going on with it. In hindsight, they, I guess, do a really good job at hiding it in plain sight. But my interactions, I guess the remote viewing side of it as a toolkit was interesting to be privy to and now understand better. But there was also, abuses going on as well, which seemed to be somehow part of certain programs.
Hmm.
So I don't want to implicate the Monroe Institute in as so far as certain aspects, but I feel like that there were other groups that were intermingling certain groups. And so some aspects of one program overlap into other aspects of another program. And I don't think that it necessarily makes all parties liable to each other.
Hmm.
As some semblance of a disclaimer to that some people are
Gotcha.
more culpable in this than others.
Understood. So, what kind of, I guess, when you look back on it, do you remember different instances where you're like, man, I can't believe that I was part of that session and saw what I saw? I mean, did they put you through the ringer where you can say, I looked back at this time or looked forward to this time and
I think
taking
what I
notes and
have
things?
more of a recollection of is that now my brain is happy because what was going on when I was a child, like as I was experiencing it at the time, they weren't explaining to us what we were doing, so it made no sense. So my brain is happy now is that I now came across as an adult what the Monroe Institute protocols and the question how they go through with the ideogram to get to the information. When I came across that information now, which is later from my perspective, it was a recollection of what we were doing when I was a kid. So to me, it went full circle, because I was like, wow, now that makes sense. Now that someone explains and I see what this process is, they weren't filling me in. So I had no way to have closure on the activity, because it made no sense with no explanation. But now, with understanding and an explanation of the activity that I went in decades before, it feels great to just have that understanding and be like, now I know what they were doing. So, you know, when they would ask me things like, what do you see? Mountains or a lake? Do you see land or water? Say whatever comes to your head. Whatever you say is right. When I was a kid, that made no sense to me. To be told that was just so bizarre. Just pick anything in my head and the answer's correct makes no sense with no explanation. But now when they say that you're remote viewing and you're hitting a target and you're doing all, oh, well, okay, well, at least there's some reasoning behind what's going on in this conversation right now. Whether you have value in the veracity of remote viewing is another thing, but at least you can understand what someone's trying to do in that exchange.
Yeah.
And I wasn't even being given that.
Interesting. Have you kept up with it, or have you been asked to use it by anyone in, you know, positions of power?
You know, something that seems interesting to me is that everybody seems to be really concerned about whether I remote view or not still, because it seems to be a very common question.
That's fascinating.
I guess I would say that I don't feel comfortable with the term remote viewing, because that's a very technical term for an activity that is defined by protocols and processes. So I would say, by the definition of the question, no, I am not in the activity of remote viewing. But what I would say is that I've always seemed to have some skill that I refer to as knowing. And that is something that I seem to always be adept at, and it just works. I mean, there's lots of times I just know something, which is almost semantics with a remote viewer when they come back from a viewing, because the whole idea is just having information in your head where you can't really define where you got it from. You just know that you used none of your five senses to get it.
Right.
And yet you're right. So that's knowing, right? If you ask me a question and I have the answer in my head, if I know the answer, but I don't even know how I know the answer or can explain, I'm no less wrong. So knowing can function if you're right.
It's pretty interesting, because it's kind of like, I don't know, it feels like a taboo subject for some people when they hear the term and they're like, well, I'm not really sure what to think of that. But to your point, like you said earlier, it's something that everybody can tap into. It's just a matter of, like you said, practice and ability, and, you know, what level are you starting off at, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And in a way, it would just be like it would be like as ridiculous as if we were in denial about guitars and people's ability to play guitar. Why would you be against everybody getting good at guitar if all this, you know, it's just this thing. And then once we realize the benefit of something, well, then we can start to, you know, just acknowledge that it exists.
Right.
You know, and then decipher how much we need it all the time or everywhere. But regardless, you know, we need to just consider that there's a reason that we have this skill set, and there's a reason that there's folks that want us to forget we have this skill set.
I think it's probably hard for people to wrap, you know, their heads around the fact that you can do that you can view a different time and space, or, you know, a different part of the country. You're just sitting in your own room, and this is something, it's a skill that you can develop where you can view something from
I've
years
suggested
ago,
to people, just
future.
to simply pay attention to how often, right? How often are you right where you actually can ascertain that you have no way to know that you are right? Like you have no means to define where your information came from. And I suggest that we're actually doing this more than we pay attention to. And I think if you focus on these types of things, you can increase the frequency and thus start training yourselves in the applications of these energies and intentions by just simply becoming observant to the frequency for which we're already doing it, which is more than you think.
Yeah, I think it's happened to all of us. You're like,
Yeah.
man, oh, I had a feeling to call you. Is everything okay? And it's
Something
just
like that. Yeah, these gut
little
feelings.
things, right?
Yes, the little things in life, but there are certain reads of energies that there are at times you will find that, plain and simple, there will be times where you know something, you're going to be right. The information will come out of your head and you're like, I have no idea how I knew that. But regardless, if at that moment your information is correct, well, then you were right. You knew something without knowing, and you connected to a truth without any experience.
And that's the nexus of remote viewing.
Pretty much is now being able to steer that ship, knowing
Right.
that the activity can occur and does occur. Now it's just a matter of doing it with intention.
Really?
It's the difference between playing a guitar and walking over one by accident. They're both going to make noise.
It's a good point. It's a good analogy. Well, I'll get you out of here on this, Eric. I just want to give you the stage, give you the floor. Anything else on your mind that if you can get one message across today in this over an hour that we've spoken here, if there's something that you want people to take away from this conversation, what's the one thing you want people to walk away from this and say, boy, that was really, really intriguing what Eric was saying?
Folks, you have to get into action. You can no longer just watch this show go on. It's time to fight back. It's time to start identifying the liars, who the con men are, who the gatekeepers are, because they're more prevalent in this conversation. And it would help the actual whistleblowers if you could sweep the shit off the floor before we arrive.
Well, there you have it. Eric Hecker, thank you so much. I have a feeling this isn't our last conversation. That's my remote viewing. I see us talking again in the future. I can see it right now in my mind. So until then, Eric, thank you so much again for spending all this time, for coming back here with me on UAP. And I look forward to talking to you again soon, because I know there's a lot more ground that we can cover with everything going on in the world today.
Absolutely, Steve. It was a great chat, and thanks for having me on.
Talk soon. Thank you.